I am yelling just to keep everybody quiet. Good morning, everyone. My name's Carl Rosen, Chair of the Search Committee, also Head of the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our third and final candidate for the Department of Forest Resources Head. It's Bill Stewart, Dr. Bill Stewart. He's professor in the Department of Recreation, Sport, and Tourism at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He received a BS in chemistry at the University of Illinois in 1977, an MBA in economics at the University of Chicago in 1979, a master's in watershed management and forestry from the University of Arizona, 1984, and a PhD in that department in 1987. Following his PhD, he joined the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Sciences, Texas A&M University, as an assistant professor. Was promoted to associate professor there in 1993. And in 1997, he joined the Department of Recreation, Sport, and Tourism at the University of Illinois and was promoted to full professor there in 2005. While at the University of Illinois, he's held a number of administrative appointments, and these are in no particular order: Director of Graduate Studies, Director of Undergraduate Program in Interdisciplinary Health Sciences, Supervisor of the Motorcycle Rider Program, Associate.
I like that one.
That was a good one, yeah. Associate Dean for Academic Affairs for the College of Applied Health Sciences, Acting Head in the Department of Speech and Hearing Sciences, Director of Park Planning and Policy Lab, and Chair of the Human Dimensions Environmental Systems Program, and probably some other ones that I haven't mentioned. But his research is highly interdisciplinary and is focused on enhancement of natural resource policies and practice. His place-based conservation research has facilitated communities to recognize the desirable characteristics of their locale as they make land use decisions to engage external markets and services. One last thing, he teaches. He's taught a number of courses at University of Illinois. Some of the more recent ones include contemporary issues in recreation, sport, and tourism, building healthy communities, survey of topics of interdisciplinary health, and contemporary issues in leisure research. Yeah. So with that, Bill, let's welcome Dr. Stewart.
Yeah. Thank you.
He'll be giving his vision for the Department of Forest Resources.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. I appreciate the introduction. I can't tell you, I'm really happy to be here. I feel honored to have made this cut to come here for an interview. So this is an exciting time for me. I'd also like to say that my title, University of Minnesota, sort of actually goes back to my graduate years. Dave King, who was a forest economist, he was my major advisor at University of Arizona, and he's a graduate of this program with his PhD, along with Phil Knorr, who was influential in getting me to University of Arizona. He also was a graduate of University of Minnesota, so there's this tie. I feel like there's this tie I have with University of Minnesota. I just wanted to recognize I've been hearing good things about University of Minnesota for quite some time. I'm really happy to be here, though. This is such a great experience for me to have an opportunity to come to know who the Forest Resources is and the College of NC fans. So thank you for the introduction. I'd like to say that I've had a warm welcome already. When I was picked up at the airport last night, Kristen Nelson took me on a wonderful but brief tour of the Twin Cities. It was neat to see the kinds of things beyond. I've been here for several times for conferences, and I've never gotten beyond the convention center. So it was really cool to see the river, how clean the Mississippi was. If you've ever been to Illinois and seen the Mississippi River there, it's more of a slow-moving sort of mud flow. So I could actually see below it and see rocks, so it felt really good. Hey, so it's what I'd like to bring out here. I'm going to start with sort of my punchline, and I'll probably end with my punchline too. And my punchline is about what I think a department head's supposed to do. We see here this painting by Carla Gerard. It's got a lot of elements in it. I mean, there's wildlife, there's water, there's a soil profiles it looks like, there's a sun implying a climate, there's some trees, there's people, there's a community. There's all sorts of things in this painting that if you just list them, you wouldn't understand what's in the painting and what it looks like until there's a gestalt that's made. I mean, it's only by visually seeing it, a narrative comes forth here. And I'm going to say, if there's one takeaway I'd like you to leave with this talk, it has to do with, what does the department head do? And I think it's about representing a department. The notion of representation is so important because it implies advocacy for the faculty and staff at college and campus level. It's about explaining ourselves to our alums and our external stakeholders. There's a need for representation that I take very seriously, and that all these pieces, they only fit together because of the painting. If I were to just list you what's on there and have you all draw something, it'd probably be 50 different drawings you would come up with. And it's only by looking at what Carla Gerard did do we see a story that comes together. And so for me, an important part of what a department head does, that they function to tell the story of the department in ways that are persuasive, that engage others, that lead people with a favorable sense of, I want to be part of that place. So I just come out here with this painting, not to mention it's a nice, a great thing to view, I think. And I'd like to talk with you a bit about my attraction to the head position. First and foremost, it's sort of the topical areas that you're involved with. I mean, there's forests, there's people and communities, and there's a connection between them. And I think that connection that ties people to their environments, I love sitting on that and thinking about ways to explore that through research, through teaching, and through public engagement. Throughout my entire career, I've spent time connecting those things of people, of natural resources and their uses, and the environment. And for me, this department really does a great job of, through the faculty and staff, of tying those things together. And I've actually looked over graduate student applications, because this may sound like it's very simple and maybe platitudes to you all. I've actually seen applications where I've rejected them because they talk only of the resource, or they talk only about the person. And I like things that connect things together. So one of the attractions here is with Forest Resources, there's a general narrative about the department that for me is very compelling. And it's about people that collectively pull the environment, the natural resources, the forest resources with people and their communities and their industries. And I really like that gestalt that you give to me. The other thing I like is the interdisciplinary scholarship. And these things sort of go hand in hand here. I can't imagine a focus on connecting forests with natural resources and with people. It's not interdisciplinary, but I've seen examples of that happening. So I just wanted to state that the interdisciplinary part of you, and between your curriculum, your research, the way you engage your communities, is really a compelling factor about why this is a neat position for me. Then, of course, there's this long history of excellence with forest resources, at least in my own lived experience, dating back to my major advisors when I was in graduate school. So, but it dates back even further than that. I think I saw on your site that was the first forestry class taught in 1889, I believe. And then you have had a division, was it 1903? So, this is, there's a tradition here that I want to respect and honor. And how do we bring that forward and update that would be the question I think that we've collectively would face. And then I can't help but say the land-grant mission is very near and dear to my heart, where it's about, there's a democratic mandate of knowledge and dissemination that I really believe in and I'm passionate about. It's not just about us privileged few that are in these positions, and let's face it, we all care deeply about what we know, about what we talk about, what we write about, and we want to make sure that that information gets out there and we engage others. Many times through that engagement process, we learn and they learn, but we all rise together. It's about practical knowledge, and then the service to the people is such an important part, which I'm hard-pressed to identify a department that has more fingers out there for an engaged community than Forest Resources does. It's truly impressive in terms of just by reading your web pages, all of the capacity you have to reach others. There's both a political component of that, there's a knowledge component, there's an engagement that really does service to the state well. And I think there's a proud tradition that I think whatever happens needs to move forward in very similar fashions in terms of this history of excellence. So for me, part of the advocacy piece is about the clarity of what the scholarly identity is. When I think about all the pieces that the forest resource faculty fit, it's amazing. It's truly impressive, the different pieces you have in terms of from climate to soils to forest to dendrology to genetics. I mean, the whole gamut of studies is there. And for me, what are some themes that can bring people together? And I think that developing a clarity on, I can't just list 22 or 50 research areas. When you represent a faculty, it amounts to an elevator pitch sounds platitudinous, but it's about something that would be more, that would be glue that would hold people together in the department. And so for me, finding that clarity on the scholarly identity, raising visibility to it becomes very important. And when I call it branding, for lack of a better word, I think that branding is so important when you say forest resources to people on campus. I would like people to have some notion of what that is without explaining and going through each individual research. It'd be nice to pull it together through some, I'm going to call it conceptual glue that holds the frameworks together here. So the scholarly identity, in my mind, that's sort of guidepost. And so it helps us decide when we make decisions what's inside our box and what's outside our box. We need to put some guidelines down so that we don't appear, so we're not opportunistic, so we have this driven agenda that's done, that's well cited, that's well thought through. We want to make sure that we're moving forward in directions that we've thought about. And that's why I think the scholarly identity becomes so important. It's sort of a basis for all sorts of things: research, teaching, advancement, when you talk with alums, when you talk with external constituencies. It's when you have a fairly solid scholarly identity, that becomes a nice piece to use to help you make decisions on. The other thing I will say is that a scholarly identity, it helps to think about the opportunities that might come forward. There's some opportunities you might want to bite at, but they're outside that framework of how we think about ourselves. We've got to give more thought to it. So that representation of scholarly identity becomes important to me. When in the past 15 years, about 10, 12 years ago, my university started to say, let's do more with less. Then the next year, let's do more with less. And then the year after that, let's do more with less. So we had like 5 years of let's do more with less. And actually, I think many of us were doing more with less for 5 years straight. But after the 6th year, I stopped hearing that because it just started to get ridiculous. How can you do more with less for 6 years in a row through budget cuts? And so strategic planning became very important, where you needed to be more critical about what it is you're going into and why are you going into that. And I think strategic planning helped everyone think about, move away from the do more with less model and think about how do we go about really shaping who we are in the future. And so that strategic investment, strategic planning came into focus maybe about, at least at my university, about 8 to 10 years ago. And through strategic investment, we started to think about partnerships was sort of the next morphing of the way we thought about where we're going to go in the future. And I think that partnerships, at least the new one that was brought to me, was sort of corporate partnerships. But there's also agency and organizational partnerships that are important to pay attention to. And at some point, the merging of strategic investment came with these leveraging resources with your partners. So there's a need to, I'm going to say, pull these 4 things together by having a fairly clear vision that brings together pieces of faculty. And when I think of a vision, it's not like 100% of everyone needs to be part of the vision. If it's just a piece of every faculty is part of that vision, that's what the important part is. Too many times people think of a vision as being something that 100% of everyone is in that vision. And then it just becomes a laundry list. When I think of a vision, I think of something that a piece of everyone is part of that vision. There's a collective, why is any given person part of this whole? Well, there's usually a piece of any given person that's important. And so I think of these visions, I don't want to put too much stock in that notion how it needs to reflect people. but it doesn't need to reflect the entire person, a piece of it that brings you to forest resources. And so with this guiding vision, with a strategic sort of dialogue, and these partnerships are made with faculty, with students, with external constituents, with alums and friends, I think that there's a nice resources for information to help guide moving forward. And I think of, I'm going to go through a few slides here that I think there's this updating of the land-grant mission, because it's something I really believe in strongly. And I'm going to say that there's new ways of knowing that you all are doing. And I'm just going to, I think, articulate that, at least the way that I've made sense out of interdisciplinary scholarship. When I think of the way a university is organized, you know what I want to do? I want to shake it up. I want to shake up all these disciplines. I want to throw them out on the table, and I want to organize them by various themes and problems we have in society. And that way you get teams of people working on similar problems, coming together, and you organize knowledge in different ways. It used to be, at least when I went to school, you know, I needed to take Chem 101 before I took Chem 102, and then I took Chem 236, and then I took Chem 336. There was this, I'm going to call it a foundational basis for knowledge. What interdisciplinary thinking does, it liberates you from that foundational knowledge, and it allows you to think about what pieces need to come together, okay? And you all lived your life in this way. If you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, in my case, you've got actinic keratosis, means blotchy skin, what I do is I go back home and I look up that word in on the files, and I'm able to figure out, I'm not a doctor, but I'm able to figure out what blotchy skin means to me. And I'm able to figure out what solutions might be to get there. So I'm going to bring out that this coherence theory of knowledge is different than a foundational theory of knowledge. And when you think about building coherence in our understanding in the way that we create knowledge, all of a sudden it opens up new pathways. So interdisciplinary scholarship is about having students who usually see themselves as consumers of knowledge, as consumers of information, having them see from the get-go that they too can be creators of knowledge. Thinking between the spaces of those disciplines, okay, is about enabling them and giving them opportunities in which they can make the world cohere in an articulate fashion that customizes that knowledge for them. So in terms of updating that land-grant mission, I'm going to say there's new ways of knowing. And one of the new ways for me has been this coherence theory of understanding rather than this foundational knowledge. It's not to say we haven't done great things with a foundational knowledge base over 5 centuries of having academic institutions, but we've moved into this coherence way of a framework, and this department is actually a great example of that. And that leads to different kinds of creativity in science, where in my lifespan, there's been all sorts of, what's rigor in science? And I think that notion of rigor in science, that there's new ways of thinking about rigor, new methods that come forward, new theories that help us engage with the subject matter of our discipline. And so this notion of creativity in science has made a lot of advancement that sometimes we don't sit back and reflect enough on what is this new way of knowing. And then this last one is about engaging communities where, at least my own research, I've come to learn a lot from the people and the communities that I work with. And I think when I first started out, I somehow thought, okay, I got my PhD, I'm ready to do research, I sort of know. And I think that was sort of naive of me in those days, but I'm actually learning a lot. Many times the professions are actually moving forward on things before the discipline has gotten to it. So I think there's a progress there that the communities are making that we need to know about as researchers. And so I think that if it wasn't for this coherence theory of knowledge, I don't know if I would frame what they're telling me as a way of knowing and as an important factor I need to pay attention to. And then part of that, this new ways of knowing are our teaching strategies we use. After all, life is lived in interdisciplinary ways, but often knowledge is organized in disciplinary ways. So often those lived experience, often those, the way that interdisciplinary research comes about and teaching is through experiential courses. At least if you are up, the Chronicle Fire Education, each year they have a handful of articles that deals with experiential learning, where it doesn't have to come from the professor's mouth for people to understand. And I think the other part of that is that active learning strategies have become very important too, where you work in small groups, and it's not as if it needs to come from the professor's, the way professor, what we say. So I've actually think of new ways of teaching through it's not a strong following, but it's gaining momentum. And that way they can, when they apply to a job can say they've got a digital badge in some capacity, along with certifications which is a little bit different than the digital badge. So, yeah, I'm just going to go forward here.
Yeah, just keep talking.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate all you're doing here. So the other thing I'm going to say is that I'm actually going to go on to the next slide here, that an important part of updating the land-grant mission is that there's the solution-driven science that also is tied to environmental responsible values. I think a lot of what we do within, I'm going to say, forest resources and natural resources in general, we not only give a solution-driven science, but there's a social or environmental responsibility. I mean, we teach values. And I've heard some people say, oh, well, values are embedded and they're deep and they can't change. I've never been one to give up hope, and I think that values do need to change. I think that some people don't even know their values. In my history, I've taught a course called Nature and American Culture, which was sort of a discovery class of, it was premised on everyone has a land ethic, whether they know it or not. And the class really gave them the capacity and the language to articulate their land ethic. And so I think this notion of learning about values is something that we do in forest resources. And I think that's an important piece along with the solution-driven science. And I think there's already courses that are on the books, environmental issues, integrated decision-making. At least there's a handful of courses I saw that probably talk about values as much as they talk about evidence-based information and decision-making. The other thing that I think is important here is that there's various kinds of stressors. You've got environmental stressors of climate change, invasive species, land use changes. You've also got community-based stressors of population change, the need for evidence and science to help us through our decision-making. And so I think that's a very compelling thing about the position here is I feel this sense of urgency to make sure that people understand roles for evidence in decision-making. I'm going to say roles for values, okay? There's roles for both values and there's roles for evidence in the way we make policy and the way we practice our land use changes. So these are sort of roles that I think our forest resources can play. And I'm going to add to that that these pieces of change, the environmental stressors, the community-based stressors, they add up to communities adapting to this new production scenarios for Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. I'm actually going to go to the next slide here. I think that often, for me, diversity is it's about diversity-friendly department. So, oh, you all got a glimpse of it, so we're testing you. Who's being grilled here? So I think that the notion of diversity as being, it's not just about numbers of how many, do we reflect the public in Minnesota. I think it's about a climate in our department. And are we open to new ways of thinking and dialogue? Because you have someone from a diverse background, it's not like, oh, okay, they're part of us now. Everyone changes, and I'm going to say gets better, because there's different kinds of voices at the table. I think having different kinds of voices for a public land grant is essential, absolutely essential to make us better. And making us better isn't just about having some box to check. It's about a dialogue that affects us all. So, and I also think that then building this inclusive culture, it's not just something you do and then you can sort of move on, okay? It's about an everyday practice, okay, is building an inclusive culture. I'm constantly learning new ways of talking, of speaking. What I did in the next class period, I actually opened it up for a class dialogue about use of language. And I talked about my own history with diversity and with issues that deal with difference and the celebration of that. And I allowed other students to share stories of their own, because it was very meaningful to me for me, having a cultural module in it, or a cultural piece. But I think there are several classes that could account for cultural factors in the way we come to know. So that was just one example. There's several others good things going on in the college and campus. I'm just bringing that up as an illustration of how we need to be continually vigilant, and we need to continually learn and implement. The other thing I'll say, and this is going to take, I actually would like to get, because I've got some data that I wanted to show up there. It's pretty much a talk I'm giving, but I've actually, when I think about the metrics for diversity, because for me, I think there needs to be a dialogue on what diversity means to people. I've always been amazed at what people come up with of what diversity means and what it doesn't mean. And I'm not looking for consensus in terms of what it means. I just want to hear what people think. Is diversity what building inclusivity means to people? And it's surprising. People learn from those conversations. As long as they're structured right, as long as you're careful about presenting information, it's key. The starting point for diversity and inclusivity is to bring people together in pods or something where they learn, and they learn how to talk about this, because it can go south real fast. But once you have that and you sort of gain some trust with people and there's some safe spaces, I do think that metrics become important. What does diversity look like is a question that I would ask. And there's various ways you can think about diversity. I guess I want to go at the state statistics. Okay, so here's what Minnesota is as of the American Community Survey, which is run by the Census 2015. Minnesota has a population, so it's got 50-50 male-female in terms of the ratio. And then it's got people of color is the way that this college frames it, students of color, SOC. 19% of Minnesota is people of color. So that would be one metric, and you can look around. Do we reflect that? In terms of the college, and these are numbers I've gotten from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion from Carl Lorenz. The college, in terms of the undergraduates, the female-male ratio is is 60-40. Okay, so. And within forest resources, the ratio is the reverse of that. For female-male, it's 40-60. We've got some ways to go, and so that sort of at least sets a start at where should we move this, and you can see where the target might be inside either the college or the state. I actually like reflecting the state's population, because the college is also working on things, so it'd be nice to bring everyone along together. And if you look at the graduate student population, the college is 50-50 female-male in ratio, and the forest resources graduate is 55-45 female-male. So they're relatively balanced and equal there. The domestic students of color for the college is 11% at the graduate level, and forest resources is 14%. So you're actually doing a little better than the colleges in terms of those graduate students. These are masters and PhDs. Now, I'm not accounting for international students. I'm just accounting for domestic students and what percentage they are. So I'm only bringing this up as illustration of the kinds of things that I think a head should do. When you think about diversity, when you think about the land-grant mission, you want to say, do we reflect the state? And those are and at some point, we need to get down to the brass tacks. And the brass tacks for me is putting action to the good thoughts we all think about. I'm going to move on to the next slide, Jim, so we don't need that slide anymore. But I really appreciate you sort of sharing this spotlight with me. The other thing I'll say is that updating the land-grant mission is also about building partners and creating that leverage. I think that's so key, is to build partners. And the thing is, there's already a great set of partnerships that this department's already built So it's clearly about building on that. And I enjoy working across a diverse constituency. That's something that I thrive on. And for me, I frame it as a learning thing. I'm always learning from people. And usually when I meet with people, they bring energy to the meeting. And I'm like, wow, I leave more energized than when I came to it. I always think that's exciting for me to be part of those conversations. And I'll also say that I think, what do I need to know to make decisions for a department? So I would definitely have some sort of faculty advisory committee, an elected body of faculty. We wouldn't meet much, but my framework for working with faculty is I want to learn what the values are. What should I prioritize? And these are things like, untenured, tenure-track faculty. If there's resources to be had, make sure you prioritize untenured, tenure-track faculty. Make sure you prioritize faculty that might be switching their line of research a little bit. Or make sure you might have a faculty who's going to go on sabbatical and need some resources. So there's various values that a department faculty would have. And I want to learn what those values are. I have some ideas, and I definitely have no problem coming out with the draft, but I'd like to hear I'd like to sort of have faculty build ownership in these values. So when I implement them, that's the role of department head, is to implement through technical ways, through proposals for educational policy, through other things that deal with advancement, through research collaborations, initiatives, and incentives. I think I want to learn about the value from faculty. So I definitely think a faculty advisory board would be something I'd want to put together just to get advice on occasion, and it would work both ways. The other thing I would like to do is put together an alumni advisory board, where I'm hearing from the alumni, what types of things do I need to know from alums? And I can think of a lot of things. I mean, alums want to give back. They usually love where they came from. They care deeply about this program. So how do they give back? Well, we need to make opportunities to help them give back. You've already got a good slew of opportunities, so I'm not saying change those. I'm simply saying we need to think carefully about other ways in which alums can give back. And of course, there's always a financial thing. From what I've seen in the budget, like about 15% of the budget for Forest Resources is about gifts that come from the department through alums and friends of. So I want to make sure that we're paying attention to that very important group. And of course, students are extremely important. On many occasions, I have no problem pulling together students, having a group, perhaps a council of graduate or undergraduate students, and seeking advice from them. So these dialogue forums, in my mind, work both ways. And at the end, it's about creating a team, about creating an ownership in what decisions are being made. Yeah, I'm going to go on to the, there's also something there about state and national and international partners. So I can't underscore enough how my life has been enriched from the partners I've built in my state of Illinois, through the national networks I've had, and through the international networks I've made. So I'm just going to say that a notion of forming networks, it's not that hard, okay? You have a visiting scholar. I mean, my guess is every one of us, once per week, we probably get an invitation to come someplace or to have someone come over here from out of this country. And you don't bite at most of those things, but occasionally you do bite. And those are important opportunities to mix faculty and students with new ways of thinking. And before you know it, you go over there, you come back, you get people that want to join your lab. I've been amazed at how these things can snowball quite quickly. The other thing I'll say is that there's this interdisciplinarity through strategic partnerships that's very important. So for me, number one is I want to come to know ourselves. Right now, I know I've reviewed everyone's vita, I've read your web pages, but it's given me pieces. And right now, my mind is filled with pieces, and I'm trying to build coherence out of that. And I've got some ideas of how to build coherence, but for that first, if I were to come here, that first half year, a year, I would want to talk with faculty, with alums, with students, to find out how others might put glue together on things. And so I think that part of the coherence within a department it's about points of tangency. It's also points of difference. So because you're looking to build coherence, it doesn't mean differences are bad, okay? It's not at all. In fact, differences are often very good. I think people come to those meetings thinking they're going to be forced into a consensus. And that's not where I'm at. I think many times drawing lines can be important about, well, I approach it through this framework, you approach it through that framework. And that sort of negotiation is very important to building coherence, is what the overlaps are, what's the points of tangency, as well as what are the points of difference. And then for me, that helps me build this narrative. I think that's so important to build a narrative that would then incentivize faculty connections. I know one of the things that I've done, sort of a simple thing with my own department of recreation, sport, and tourism, we've only got 2 or 3 faculty in my department that deal with land management issues. And fortunately, we've got a great landscape architect department, urban planning, and natural resource and environmental science department at my university. So there's been a handful of faculty that like to connect environment to people and communities. And we formed this research group. And that research group has a bi-weekly seminar. And that bi-weekly seminar, it functions to build a scholarly identity. We've actually had graduate students come and tell us that's the highlight of their semester, is every other week going to this seminar. And sometimes there's a new speaker. We've used it for guest speakers coming from out of town who are on, you know, are part of a collaborative team, and we end up, they speak to us for free. I mean, our budget's 0 for the group, so we make do with a lot. And then I use a little bit of overhead to have lunch now and then. But it's a way to build a scholarly identity that keeps a dialogue moving. And I felt real successful when the department head of another department on campus came and said, hey, you're competing with my social scientist. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Actually, your social scientist is a part of my group, part of our group that your department's part of too. So I think there's ways in which you can build these connections and come to know yourselves that weaves together across time a narrative that's very compelling and persuasive. The other thing I'll say is that there's usually incentives on campus that allow for connections. So I don't want to, this isn't about forest resources going it alone, okay? This is about forest resources nested within CFANS, nested within this wonderful Twin Cities campus, nested within all the political constituencies and external partners we have. So it's about people and places nested within each other. And I think that is extremely, when everyone's looking in some similar directions, there's a very powerful narrative that is built. And I think you've got that narrative. I think just pulling it to the surface is sort of what I would see my task as doing, is to pull. So, oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I think there's an importance about the PhD. I mean, no doubt, masters are important. Okay, so I'm not anti-MS degrees, but what makes us tick here, what distinguishes University of Minnesota from all the other institutions in the state, is that PhD programs and that degree. So my thought is that, and that goes hand in hand with faculty productivity. So there's a strong PhD, strong faculty. They're coupled together. They're sorts of things that exist together. You couldn't have a strong faculty without a strong graduate program. So I'm always one to be thinking about how can we enhance our student, the quality of our student experience at the graduate level. No matter how strong it is now, and it's strong, okay, how can we get better? And so part of that, getting better, okay, because I love stories about getting better, okay. Often it's not about the state you're in now. I'm a creature of the future. What's the stories we want to tell in the future, and how do we build that narrative for the future? I'm sensitive to faculty and staff development. So everyone's got their own sort of path they're on in terms of intellectual life. And how do we move people forward in ways that they want to move forward, at the same time meeting our collective goals? So I just want to let you know that no matter what your rank is, I mean, most people think, oh, department heads need to get assistant to associate, and then you can sort of clap your hands. I think associate to full, I mean, these are all patterns that we need. I even think going from full professor, there's stages of being a full professor that are important too. So I think everyone needs to think about where they're going and the sense of urgency that they feel about those things that they want to change in literature, with their students. It needs each color. They're vivid, they're distinct, they're brilliant, okay? But the colors don't tell the whole story of that painting, okay? If I told you the colors, you wouldn't know that painting unless you saw them as a whole. Okay, there we go. Oh, there, and so I wanted to thank you very much, Kristen. So I just wanted to bring out that, again, this theme about, there's a gestalt about the department, and that's the function. If there's any important function the department head serves, it's building that gestalt. It's thinking about a synergy. How do we come together as people and scholars? So that's my story, and I really appreciate your patience with the slides here. Thank you.
Very nice. I apologize for the technical difficulties there. Maybe first duty as a department head would be to upgrade this system here, I think.
I'll ask the dean for some money.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
You've experienced it, Brian.
So the floor is open for questions for Bill, and are there any questions?
I tagged some friends back there before the thing. I'm going to ask some questions there. Hey, Dan? No? No, okay. Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Wait a second.
So you talked about faculty and alumni boards,
Yeah.
and you mentioned that and recognize the importance and connections in the community that our department has. I'm wondering about stakeholder advisory boards related to the department, related to facilities like CFC and Hubachek associated with the department, and your thoughts about that.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca, for that question. Yes, so in terms of the, I've thought it through to the extent where I definitely would like a faculty advisory board and an alumni advisory board. I definitely want to get information from external constituents. I don't know how diverse of set they are and how varied they are. It may be that maybe I have pockets rather than meeting them all at once. You know, I haven't quite thought that through carefully about how to work with external partners. I will say very definitely I want to engage them, absolutely. I don't know what structure would be right for it right now. Except to say that I want to do that. I don't quite know how to work it so that there's no one. In my mind, the approach is important. You don't want to exclude anyone. And I've seen situations where you forget to invite that one external constituency. I want to approach them a little more carefully about how to bring them together. So I like that question. And then you also asked another group.
It was the same one. I think about some of our facilities. I also think about some of our facilities that are associated with the department, like the Cloquet Forestry Center, and whether having, you know, an advisory board for that facility in terms of providing direction to the director of those facilities would be a useful thing as well.
You bet. Yeah, the Cloquet Forestry Center, the Hubachek, those are such neat facilities you've got here. So I definitely would like to find ways in which to engage them. And I guess I would want to talk with the directors of those programs to find out more about what their advice would be to engage a constituency to further elevate their status and visibility within the state. I've seen some stuff that's already being done there, and I'm impressed with it, but you can always, I think there's always a need to look for further ways to engage those remote stations. Yeah.
I've got a question from online.
Oh, yeah.
Michael Dockery, oh, sorry, I get that right. Thank you for your presentation. I am Michael Dockery from the Forest Service. I appreciate your discussion of diversity. What are your thoughts about the engaging the American Indian tribes in the state?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. So there's a handful of ways. So for me, engagement's always multi-pronged. Okay, there's no one solution. It's about surrounding. But if you want to engage something, it's done sort of like a monsoon. You need to engage in multi-pronged ways. And I would say, I mean, through curriculum is one way that I think you've already got started a traditional ecological knowledge program going with the American Indian Center, I've been told. And I think there's something neat about that. I mean, cultural ways to bring in culture into courses is always a great way to embrace minorities. So I think a traditional ecological knowledge, I think this WADI, this working across differences, might be a way also to, beyond just that courses in that new traditional ecological knowledge. I also think in terms of engagement, I think you've already got some people who are working with the tribes. If I remember some of the Vedas right, and I would probably rely on, I definitely think that visiting the tribes, building trust is important. I know that trust is something that's not easily given. So it's something that always needs to be vigilant. So I would probably go with people who are already working with the tribes for the introduction to them and sort of hear what the tribes are saying about how they would like to engage. I'm not going to assume that I know what they want. I do think it'd be important to hear them tell me what they want. And there may be multiple voices within any given tribe. So I think to the extent possible, listening to those multiple voices within a tribe would be an important part of the engagement piece. In terms of the research piece, I'd have to explore how, I'm not quite sure how funding would work with American Indian and research. And maybe they more want the benefit of the degree programs here. So I don't know if they would be open to new ways of learning like distance learning or blended programs. I did look on the Minnesota web page. Isn't there a community college located in a tribal area? And I think that there could be some interesting stuff done with the cooperation. I know that, I don't know if Minnesota does 2+2 programs, but I do think there could be some things that work so so Forest Resources knows about here's the courses you need to take at this technical school in order to come into here as a junior. And maybe even then because they may not like to travel to the Twin Cities, maybe even part of their year might be an online program where they could do something where it's more of a blended program. So those are things that I would explore at least. But I would be open to suggestions. Michael, if you've got some ideas, I'm open to thinking about this. In Illinois, my experience is not strong with Native Americans. We don't really have many tribal people at Illinois. My experience really is with the University of Arizona, where there were a number of tribes that work with the University of Arizona, and that's really where most of my experience has been. But it's not been administratively; it's just been more to visit reservations. So I guess I'm saying I need to learn.
Before I forget, I want to remind you to fill out the evaluation forms, and you can do that online through the CFAN site. There's also some hard copies back there, so I encourage you to pick that up. We still have a minute or two. Any questions, last-minute questions? Well, I'll ask you one. Has to do with the fact that you got a BS in chemistry and then got an MBA.
Yeah.
And so how did you get into
watershed management
and policy?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Yes, so I had this previous life that I used to be I'm going to call a businessman. So when I graduated from my bachelor's in chemistry, I went to work for Standard Oil of Indiana. They're now the BP Oil, and I was this marketing technologist. I worked between the petroleum additives sales staff, and I could speak the language of chemistry, so I worked between the laboratory people and the sales staff. And I worked there for 2 years, and I had a great experience, but it wasn't about what I wanted to think about. And I left that job to get an MBA. I thought to get ahead in business, I need this MBA. And It was a job that people, my friends couldn't believe I was quitting this job that they would have loved. I mean, it was like big money and oil expense accounts back in the late 70s. It was like people were astonished that I would quit that job, but I knew it wasn't me. I couldn't sit there and basically go out on sales calls and then talk to the staff. So I went back to business. I worked, and then once I got my MBA, I went to work for Arthur Andersen Consulting. They're now called Accenture, and that was a wonderful experience. I worked in their chemical engineering construction consulting department, and I had this great 2-year experience there. But at the end of the day, and I worked real hard in both of these jobs, at the end of the day, I didn't feel like it was me. I felt like there's more to life than living on expense account. And believe me, I was going everywhere. My last 11 months were in Tokyo, Japan, where I had this expense account, a real fancy apartment. But it wasn't who I was. I remember thinking when I was reviewing their plans to locate a chemical engineering refinery plant in Nigeria, their cultural impact statement talked about moving people, moving natives. And their environmental impact statement talked about making the earth flat to put the cement slab down. And I'm like, I'm part of this, and this is wrong, what's going on here. There's more information about social and ecological impact than what we're giving credence to here as a consultant, basically helping them make money faster. So I'm not anti any of that. So if anyone here is going on in the business, you go. It just wasn't me, okay? So I went back to graduate school thinking that I want a program that gives social sciences, that's a relatively open program. So I went to University of Arizona because it was I could learn the technical aspects of watershed management and forestry. You know, cruising timber, runoff from the watershed, water quality issues, soil chemistry. I learned all those things, and actually I liked learning that. But my real grist of my dissertation research was really about social and behavioral sciences. So I took some environmental sociology classes there, some economics, and some environmental psychology. And I've never looked back. After that first year in Arizona, it was just like hog heaven. I wasn't making any money, but I just felt so good. And it's about feeling good, I guess, for me. So in my mind, although there's all sorts of nice reasons that are global, that are a sense of urgency, at the end of the day, it's about me and what I want to feel good about. And I feel real good. For 30 years, I've never looked back. It's been the greatest career and the privilege I've had to do research and to teach students. So that's sort of how I made that, that twist.
Thank you very much. It is, the hour is up, so I think we'll adjourn right now. You have an important meeting with the Dean for lunch down in 116. So let's thank Bill again.
Thank you.